Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven, and today our special guest is Nora Gold. So Nora is a prize-winning author of 5 books and the recipient of multiple awards, including the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, a Vine Canadian Jewish Book Award, and a Canada Council Translation Grant. Her writing has been praised by Cynthia Ozick, Alice Munro, and Publishers Weekly, and has received international acclaim, including from the New York Times Wirecutter, Los Angeles Review of Books, and Hadassah Magazine. A former professor, Gold is also the founder and editor of the prestigious literary journal Jewish Fiction, which has published 650 stories, originally written in 23 languages. She's appeared on podcasts in Canada, USA, Spain, India, and Australia, and has over 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. So welcome, Nora.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
No problem. Can you tell us a little bit of about yourself and how you began writing?
Sure, pleasure. I began writing at a very young age. I guess it depends how you define writing, because even before I could actually write with a pencil, I would sit and make up stories and tell stories to anybody who would listen. So in a way, I've always been a writer. And even as a young child, you know how grown-ups always ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, a writer at age 4, at age 5. And I had this little um, box with pencils and paper, and I would always have it with me, that sort of thing. I did decide at a certain point, I was living an academic life. I was a tenured professor. And I had already published my first book, which was called Marrow and Other Stories, which won this Vine Canadian Jewish Book Award. And I was standing by the photocopier and I thought, other people can teach this class and no one else can write my books. And I
Yes.
decided to leave, which is a strange thing to do if you're an academic. Like, that's the be all and end all. Why would somebody leave? But it was January 1st, 2000. It was the beginning of the new millennium. And I'm very happy I did. It's what I always wanted to do. It's what I was born to do, and it's what I'm doing. So what could be luckier than that?
So how did your career evolve? Like in academia, you write as well. So how did it evolve from writing papers for academics to writing novels?
Well, great question. I always wrote stories. Like everybody in high school, you write term papers, and then when you go in college, you do it. And when you're an academic, you just do a different version of that. It's still. I never stopped writing stories, meaning fiction. I published my first stories and poems when I was in college. And I was always leading this double life. I mean, I guess many of us have multiple lives. Um, it became harder and harder to integrate those two lives because, um, I did have colleagues who just showed up for classes and didn't do anything else, but I was active as one should be in one's community. I was on committees. I was involved with all sorts of university-wide issues, not only my own department. So it was a full-time job. And at a certain point, I was just happened to wake up every morning at 1 in the morning and write for 4 hours and go back to sleep from 5 to 7 and then get up and take care of my child and drive an hour to my job. And after about 8 months of this, I just physically collapsed. Nobody can do that. But it showed me how strong my need was to write. And I went to part-time hoping that that would solve the problem and give me my time that I wanted. And it didn't because, half time is half pay, but I still was showing up for committee meetings. I was still working 4 days a week. So, and then I finally left. But so I never really had to integrate the two. I always thought of academic writing as, what I had to do for my job. And I remember thinking that the word writing wasn't really the right word, that there should be different words for real writing and then turning out these academic papers. I never thought of it as writing in the same way.
Okay, so you were publishing all along, like in college and university. Like, What was the biggest challenge? Like after you finished the novel, it's a bigger piece of work. So were there any challenges in getting that published?
Of course, I could say, I was one of the lucky 0.001%. Um, my first book was a book of stories, Marrow and Other Stories. My first novel was called Fields of Exile, and it was a controversial novel.
Mm.
It was a novel about anti-Semitism on Canadian campuses, including the relationship to Israel, which was published in 2014, and is still the only book, the only novel on that topic today. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's as relevant now, more relevant than it was at the time. No one wanted to touch it because it contained political uh, content, and it sounded like a downer, the same way any other form of racism is. Why would we want to deal with that, right? Although I would say that anti-Semitism is always less popular than other forms of racism for a variety of reasons, not worth going into now. It took 7 years to find a publisher. It took 7 years to write. I'm a slow writer. And then 7 years. I was sure it was just never going to get published. And then I met somebody um, who said this is a really important book and took it on. And I'm eternally grateful because that made it possible to continue writing. I don't know how people continue writing if they just get constant rejection and their books don't come out. I mean, that's just so soul destroying. Although nowadays there is self-publishing. There wasn't, I'm older. So back then it wasn't an option. And yeah, I feel I was lucky in the end, but it was really hard waiting those 7 years. Yeah.
Now, your latest book is called Doubles. Can you give us a bit of a synopsis and tell us what inspired it?
Yeah, sure. Um, this is the cover, at which my son did. I'm very proud of that. He's a designer, among other things. Doubles is a story about a 12-year-old girl, which does not make it a YA book. Some people, and I have great respect for YA literature, but this was not conceived in that way. It's a 12-year-old girl who mistakenly is put into an institution for troubled youth in 1968. She doesn't belong there, and she's there, and she survives by doing math, which she loves. She loves math, and in many ways, math is her language that allows her to continue living and to engage with the world. She's unnamed in the book, and it's written in the first person. The whole book is comprised of written responses to questions asked by a kind, friendly trustee who comes to this institution, which is called Valley View, and wants to make reforms and says to the children, I'm going to ask you some questions before we do anything. We want to know what your real life is like here. I'm going to ask you questions and write me some answers. And this girl, because she's so homesick and lonely, and the place is so crazy that she can't really make any friends, it becomes, I wouldn't say a diary, but her answers become very long and detailed. She's really talking to this trustee from her heart. And so that's the structure of the whole book. And during the course of the 6 months, which is the duration of this novella, um, she transforms from a very much a good girl, a very polite, quiet girl, into a delinquent.
Mm.
And it's a novella. It's 68 pages. I'm sorry, it's 86 pages, which means you can read it in a sitting. A lot of people who wrote advance reviews, which thankfully have been fabulous, read it in an afternoon. And that's one of the wonderful things about novellas. I love novellas, and my previous book was comprised of two novellas. I love novellas. That's a whole other topic. Um, so this is a novella.
So, what kind of themes or questions do you think you want your readers to ask after they finish Doubles?
Well, there's a very obvious question at the heart of the book. there are a number of them, but a very obvious one is what happens to children in institutions. What is our child welfare system like? My professional background was in social work, and in one of my jobs, which involved working with families of children with developmental disabilities, I was visiting group homes. We didn't call them institutions, we called them group homes, but they were institutions. Um, Many times, and got to see them up close, got to see their strengths and weaknesses. I must say, I view with great respect my colleagues who work in the field of child welfare. It's incredibly challenging, and most of them, I would say, really care about the kids and do their best for them. But there's a real lack of resources. The system has numerous flaws, all the more so in 1968 when this novella was set. So I think a reader will come out saying, oh my gosh, and I think for professionals, there's always this question of which is worse, the bad home or the institution. And one child welfare worker, um, I'll never forget this. He said, look, it's pay now or you pay later. You remove them from the home, and there's the deprivation of your family and your whole life. You lose your whole life. And that damages you for life. And that's if you're lucky and you get into a foster care or an adoptive situation where they're loving and non-abusive and all that other stuff. It's not an easy thing like, oh yeah, just yank the kid out. It's extremely difficult. I actually was part of a research study examining how social workers make that agonizing decision. So there's that. And then it's it's about how people survive. And I think no question could be more relevant to children or adults, to all of us. I mean, at this point in history, where the world is in such a state of turmoil and tragedies throughout the world, wars and tragedies and horrors, how does one survive? And this girl finds an answer through her love of math, but it really is a story about loss, coping with loss, and survival. And one might say, oh, she changes so dramatically by the end. It's very gradual and it's very organic, but wow, is this survival? Well, it is. You survive in the system, in the context in which you're living. And the way to survive in that place was to conform to some extent to what the norm was. She happens to have a great sense of humor. She's very funny. She's very perceptive. She sees everything that's happening around her, including her options for escape, actually. Um, and she's delightful. I mean, people who have read it, and the way I feel about it is I just love her. You're a writer. You don't always love your characters. I love her. I just love being near her. I sometimes reread passages just to feel her again. She's a delight and smart as a whip. Um, so I think it's a very enjoyable novella in spite of the darkness in her soul and the painful aspects, but that's part of life itself.
Oh, were there any particular scenes or moments that were very meaningful to you to write that really, I guess, resonated with you?
Well, there's one section that I often read when I'm asked to read a couple of times already, and I chose to read a different section today because the section I want to read today is also very meaningful. It's about her relationship to math, which is her lifeline. Um, the book opens with her talking about how the whole world is numbers, the number of people in my family, the number of people who have died, it's all numbers. And every single one is an answer to a question like, what are you learning? Well, nothing. How do you look at yourself? I'm a zero, etc. And then pages and pages of elaboration. So every one of them is actually reveals more about her and opens onto a different field and a different landscape. there's a section about school. She really misses school. There was one teacher she really liked, and she talks about Mr. Marcus and what she learned about history and geography. And begins during the period in 1968 when Russia invades Czechoslovakia. And she's learning about the world, and she's learning about immigrants. They get to watch, they watch a lot of TV because there are no classes, there's no formal education, and the kids are plunked in front of the TV a lot of the time. And at one point, the counselors, for lack of a better word, the child care workers, go out for a smoke, and the kids start watching What They Want, which is a very violent movie. But they also get to watch the news, which this girl finds funny. That's the most violent, horrible thing in the world because you can't say it was just made up, right? And you know, she she learns about the war. She sees a family of immigrants stranded on a beach waiting to be rescued. No one shows up. There they are with their baby. What happens to people? And she says, obviously I'm not an immigrant and I'm not in that situation, but I've been taken away from my home. I'm in a new place where the language is different. They don't talk here like they talked at home. I feel like those immigrants feel. So she's making all these connections, and it's very exciting to see her understanding of the world gradually open and finding her place in it in that way.
Okay. Like now that you're a full-time writer, do you have any, oh, we're switching topics a little bit. Let's
Okay,
just talk
sure,
about writing.
of course.
Um, do you have any habits that you find are useful for finishing a book?
I don't have any simple thing to say about that. I'm a pretty self-disciplined person.
Mhm.
There are times when I'm not writing, such as now. I have Doubles is coming out in May 1st, so I'm obviously involved with other kinds of activities. But generally, I get up in the morning and I write. I check my emails that there's nothing terribly urgent. Um, I just think it's sitting down and doing it. I don't think there's any magic formula. I know some people have a certain pen, they have, a certain
Yeah.
kind of coffee. I don't have any tricks like that. I do write by hand though, when I'm really writing, which means not editing, but just really letting it out. It's really only by hand. And that's not because I'm old-fashioned or, of course I love computers like everybody else for what they can do, but nothing but my own handwriting can keep up with my thoughts. It's just so that's the way I do it.
Now, did you receive any feedback about your writing? Any advice that you found useful for your career?
Um, I received feedback that was very damaging when I was in high school. It was damaging in the sense that I had a teacher, an English teacher, who felt so strongly about my writing. He said, "You're the voice of your generation. You are a genius." He said all sorts of things they were encouraging, but they were very problematic at the same time. Um, I've learned within a year or two to disregard that, but at the time it was not a good thing to say to a young person. It's not the kind of encouragement that one should have. But what I would say to other writers starting out, or even not starting out, but to all of us really, um, I think so much of it is persistence because it is a really brutal business. And if I compare it to academic life, which is supposed to be difficult and it's intellectual ivory tower, it was so easy compared to what I'm doing now. Honestly, um, you know, you your articles, your academic writing follows a template, basically. You do research. I'm not saying it's easy, but the writing part is a snap. You have your findings, you discuss your findings, you analyze them, you've read the literature that relates, right? Um, I was a good teacher. I got good feedback. The students liked me. When do you get feedback as a writer? What is the relationship between getting negative feedback slash ignored versus the kind of encouragement that every human being needs? So I think there's a whole piece of just finding your own personal strength or people to support you, But I also feel it's really important to be part of a community and to help each other as writers, which is what you're doing with this podcast. And it's really generous of you. And I really appreciate it. And I try to do that with my journal, which, I don't have a salary for running jewishfiction.com. Um, but it's my way of giving something back to writers who are increasingly finding it difficult to get published. I should just say, I'll just say in one sentence that Jewish writers are having um, uh, it's not a typical situation now. People are refusing to publish Jewish writers, and that's a whole other topic. So my journal has become actually much more important than it ever was. A lot of people are telling me that, and it's very time consuming. But I feel we all have to do something for other writers, and as you are. And
Yeah, well, similarly, like I'm an editor for an Asian Canadian magazine called Rice Paper Magazine, and there were some writers that they've been writers for 30 years, and they said some of my stories will only make it to your magazine, and I don't get paid, but that's fine because no one else is willing to publish it.
I know. Well, I think the racism, towards Asian people, towards every group, and anti-Semitism, which never gets included in racism, so has its own name even. But I think that that's really real stuff. And anybody who says, things have changed, everything's fine now, it's so not fine. And it's so important what you're doing with Rice Paper and with making space for these voices. I mean, I wish, it was funny because I set this novella in 1968, and a part of you wants to say, well, that was, what, 5 decades ago or whatever, more than 5 decades ago, and now things are fine for children, and now the world is hunky-dory, and it's, you know, things like, you know, abuse of children and family violence and racism and anti-Semitism seem to remain in the world. And I think we all have to work on these things. We really have to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like things are being discussed and not discussed at the same time because of fear of offending people. So then a lot of words are cleaned up and then the message gets confusing. Um,
Absolutely. I know exactly what
so
you're talking
yeah, you
about.
know what I'm
I know
talking
exactly what
about.
you're
But that's
talking
a whole different
about. Yeah,
wormhole we
yeah,
don't want
yeah,
to
yeah,
go
yeah.
into. Yeah.
It
But
totally is.
all right, Nora, you're going to do a bit of a reading for us. So can you give us a bit of context before you start?
Sure. I'm going to be reading from my novel Doubles, which is about a girl in an institution, placed in an institution erroneously, who does her best to survive using math, which she loves. And everything that in the book are her written answers to a question that she is asked by a sympathetic trustee of Valley View, which is the institution. And this question is question 6. Tell us your opinion about something. So that's all you need to know. September 18th, 1968. In my opinion, the world is divided into two words, yes and no. In my life now, yes is when things are more or less okay, and I feel calm and relaxed, maybe even a bit happy. No is when I remember that nobody here or anywhere cares about me, and no one from my family is going to rescue me and bring me home. In math, yes, no is like base 2, the binary system. There, everything is divided into either a 1 or a 0. Just as in life, where there is either something or there is nothing, and people are either something or they're nothing. If you're really and truly nothing, a 0 who doesn't matter to anyone in the world, then you may as well just off yourself, which is what a kid here did 3 days ago. Malcolm, his name was. I didn't know him well because he lived in a different section of Valley View. I only saw him once walking across a lawn. Yesterday there was an article about him in the local paper, which the counselors here tried to hide from us. But before they snatched it away, I saw the headline: Valley View boy takes his own life. All the staff and visiting trustees are in a tizzy. There have been long special meetings held behind closed doors and lots of whispering. The staff, as far as I can make out, don't feel especially sad about Malcolm. They were shocked only at first, and then they got angry, as if he'd inconvenienced them, caused them a problem. On Monday, the day after it happened, the counselors were very solicitous. They kept asking us how we felt and were we okay. But by the next day, they had returned to normal. Except that now, when the counselors aren't around, the kids make jokes about offing themselves. It somehow feels possible now, where before it didn't. In the world of Base 2, my double, wandering freely in the sunshine, having adventures and interesting experiences, like my sister Vicky, who isn't in this institution and is free. My double is a 1, and I, stuck here with no freedom, am a 0. I can understand why Malcolm offed himself. It makes sense, in a way. It's not only the people of Czechoslovakia who are under the boot of the Russians since they were invaded, who want to be free. Everyone does. Everyone loves the Monkees song, I wanna be free. Base 2 could maybe also be called second base. When I had a home, that home was my home base. Now I'm being thrown between bases like a baseball, from first base to second, then maybe on to third, but I'll never make it home. Who knows how many bases and how many homes I'll end up in by the time I turn 16. Whatever happens, though, I'll always have numbers for company. They're the one thing in this world that I can rely on. You can count on numbers, not just count them, but count on them. A 3 is a 3, and it will always be a 3. No more, no less. Numbers don't pretend or lie, get sick or die. They're always there and never change. In my opinion, they're perfect, or as close to perfect as you'll ever find. It's not only me who needs numbers. Everyone does. Every person on this planet. Without numbers, you couldn't dance, use money, tell the time, bake a cake, make plans with friends, play music, know how warmly to dress, or follow current events. For instance, how many people were killed today. In other words, you couldn't live in our world. We are dependent on numbers for almost everything, and they are our one true language. Definitely truer than words. For instance, one of the counselors is away today because last night he went to a restaurant, ate chicken, and got salmonella poisoning. Now, how ridiculous is that? How can chicken give you salmonella? It's not salmon. If you ate spoiled salmon, would you get chickenella? Of course not. See what I mean? Words compared to numbers are unclear and confusing. If I could answer this question number 6 entirely in numbers with no words at all, I would. But I don't yet have enough mathematical language for that. Or anyway, not yet. Numbers are the only thing I trust, the only thing I believe in. Simon and Garfunkel sang, "The only truth I know is you. The only truth I know is numbers." So maybe from now on I should pray every day to numbers, instead of reciting the prayer they make us say here, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, fuck fathers, I hate my father, who's not in heaven, and to hell with my mother too, who left us and is probably not in heaven either, just being chomped on by worms in that old cemetery overgrown with thorns. I will pray to numbers instead. As they taught us here to do, I'll kneel down, form my hands into a steeple, and close my eyes, and then I'll recite in a solemn voice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and just keep going till I fall asleep. Numbers are perfect, but sometimes they seem imperfect, even evil, because of what people do with them. People can misuse numbers, same as anything else. And I hate when this happens and numbers get blamed for things that aren't their fault. One afternoon last winter, Regina, my sister Vicky's friend, came over and showed us a game she'd found. It was a chart divided into 4 squares, and each square was a category that you rated a person on with a number from 0 to 10. The 4 categories were looks, intelligence, personality, and character, and I watched transfixed as Regina and Vicky rated some of the boys in our neighborhood. It was sort of interesting as well as harmless until they got to Patsy's brother, Freddie. After they rated him, he had a final score of 17 out of 40. That's 42%, and at school, 50% or under is a failing mark. Freddie failed this test. My face must have shown something because Regina asked me what was wrong. Did I disagree with their scoring? Did Freddie deserve a higher mark on any of the categories? I silently reviewed all of them while Regina and Vicky watched me closely. On looks, I admitted to myself that they were right. Freddie's not good looking. He has pale, blotchy skin, squinty eyes, and a big nose. On intelligence, he's not smart at school. On personality, he's not charming, self-confident, or popular. He's quiet and shy and blushes easily. But still, I thought, he's my friend Patsy's older brother. He's always been kind to her and friendly to me, and I like him. Well, Regina asked in her brutal way, if our scores are wrong, show us where. I thought of telling her about Freddie's goodness and that because of it we should raise his character score from 7 to 10. But I realized that even with this, he'd end up with only a 20 out of 40, which is still a fail. I sat there frustrated and silent, knowing that something was wrong with this rating scale, but I couldn't explain what. Now I can. After everything I've learned from the green math book here at Valley View that I found in the library, I understand what the problem was. Character is more important than looks, but they got the exact same weight, a maximum of 10 points. Character should have been given 15 or 20 to show it counts for more. I finished my green math book this past Thursday. I'd learned every single page in it and completed every problem or puzzle. I love that book, my trusty friend, my only friend since I've been here. But now I can't wait for the new math book to arrive. My new math book, which is not green like the old one, but vermilion, contains not only algebra, but also geometry and statistics. Statistics, as Regina's game showed, can twist things around and lie in a way, using numbers to prove nearly anything you want. Geometry, too, is about proving things, but differently from statistics. In geometry, there are proofs, and also, I guess, disproofs, because any time you prove one thing, you're disproving something else. For example, if 3 plus 2 equals 5, then 3 plus 2 does not equal 6. There are lots of different types of proofs in the world, not just mathematical ones. For instance, Mom used to proof her dough when she baked bread, and Dad once a year would proof the roof of our house. This made it strong, he said, waterproof, which protected it from the elements. During storms, the heavy rain and hailstones would bounce off our roof without doing it any damage. Out there somewhere, there must be some kind of proof that can help me and make me super strong. That will protect me from the batterings of life in this awful, awful place. So everything bounces off of me and does me no harm.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be on our show today.
Oh, thank you so much, JF. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed being here.
The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Heel Express. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please stay safe.